Numbness was a mercy I hadn't appreciated until it started to fade. For the last 3 hours, walking through the whiteout conditions of a New York blizzard had felt like being slowly encased in concrete. My knees were locking up with every step, the joints stiff and grinding, while the wind didn't just blow, it screamed down the avenues, carrying ice shards that scoured any exposed skin raw. People called this the storm of the century, a meteorological event that had paralyzed the city that never sleeps. The subways were down, the buses were buried, even the emergency sirens had fallen silent, choked off by the sheer volume of snow piling up against the brownstones. For most people, this was an inconvenience, a reason to stay inside with hot cocoa and Netflix. For me, Chloe Evans, formerly a senior investigative journalist and currently a woman with exactly $3 and a frozen granola bar to her name, this was a death sentence. I stumbled, my shoulder hitting the brick wall of an alleyway to keep from falling face first into a drift that was already waist high. If I fell, I knew I wouldn't get back up. That's how it happens. You sit down for a second just to rest. The cold stops hurting, and you drift off into a sleep you never wake up from. "Keep moving, Evans," I muttered. But the words were snatched away by the gale before I could even hear them. My lips felt like cracked porcelain. I needed shelter. The homeless shelters were at capacity 3 days ago when the temperature first dropped. The subway grates, usually a source of steam and warmth, were capped with ice or guarded by police trying to clear the streets. I was 26 years old. I had a degree from Columbia. I had broken stories that sent corrupt senators to prison, and I was going to die frozen to death behind a dumpster in Tribeca because I had looked too closely at the Albanian mob. That was when I saw it. It was a beast of a machine, a matte black SUV idling at the mouth of the alley. The exhaust pipe puffed out steady, rhythmic clouds of white smoke that dissipated into the blizzard. It looked like a monolith against the swirling white chaos. The engine was running. I froze, pressing myself deeper into the shadows of the brickwork. Instincts honed by years of chasing leads in dangerous places flared to life. A car like that, idling in a place like this, didn't belong to a soccer mom. It screamed power. It screamed danger. The tint on the windows was so dark it looked like Vantablack, absorbing the scant light from the street lamps. But then the wind shifted, hitting me with a fresh assault of sub-zero air that cut right through my threadbare coat. A coat that had been stylish 2 months ago, but was woefully inadequate for the apocalypse happening around me. My body convulsed, a violent shiver that rattled my teeth so hard I thought they might crack. I looked at the car again. The heat coming from that engine block distorted the air around the grille. It was a choice between a probable bullet and a definite freezing death. I chose the probability. I forced my legs to move, wading through the snow. My boots were soaked through, my toes long past the point of pain, existing only as heavy, useless weights at the end of my feet. I approached the rear passenger side, keeping low, praying the driver was distracted by his phone or the storm. I reached into the deep pocket of my coat. My fingers were stiff, clumsy claws, but they found the thin, flat strip of metal I'd been carrying since I lost the apartment. It was a lock shim, a tool of the trade I'd picked up from a source named Ricky the Rat, back when I was investigating chop shops in Queens. I had never used it to steal, only to verify how easy it was for a story. Now, it was my key to survival. I reached the door handle. Please let it be unlocked. Please just be a rich idiot who doesn't think anyone is out in this weather. I tried the handle. Locked. Of course. I bit back a sob of frustration. I pressed the shim between the window and the weather stripping. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. If I dropped it in this snow, it was gone forever. I bit the inside of my cheek, using the sharp pain to focus my mind. Slide, hook, pull. Ricky's voice echoed in my head. Slide. The metal went in. Hook. I felt the mechanism. Pull. There was a dull thunk inside the door panel. I tried the handle again. It gave way. The door swung open, and the sensation that hit me nearly brought me to my knees. Warmth. Glorious, thick, expensive warmth. It smelled of conditioned leather and cedar wood. It smelled like safety. I didn't look to see if anyone was in the front. I didn't care. If they shot me, at least I'd be warm when I bled out. I scrambled inside, dragging my soaked boots onto the plush floor mats, and pulled the door shut. The silence was instant. The howling wind was cut off as if a guillotine had dropped on the world. The interior was spacious, the leather seat soft and supple. I collapsed onto the floorboard behind the driver's seat, curling into the tightest ball my skeletal frame could manage. I shoved my hands into my armpits, trying to preserve what little core heat I had left. The vibration of the engine hummed through the chassis, vibrating against my spine. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever felt. "Just 5 minutes," I whispered to the darkness of the cabin. "Just warm up enough to feel my hands. Then I'll leave." But the heat was a narcotic. As the blood began to flow back into my extremities, it brought a stinging, burning agony that paradoxically made me feel heavy and drowsy. My brain, starved of oxygen and warmth for too long, began to shut down the non-essential systems. The fear of being discovered, the terror of the Albanians finding me, the shame of breaking into a stranger's car, it all receded behind a thick gray fog. I didn't hear the driver get in. I didn't feel the car move. The last thing I registered was the smell of cedarwood and the rhythmic hum of the engine, before the blackness took me completely. Waking up was violent. It wasn't a slow drift into consciousness. It was a jarring snap, like a rubber band hitting bare skin. My eyes flew open, but my brain couldn't process the data. I wasn't moving. The engine hum was gone. The air was still warm, but different. It smelled of oil, polished concrete, and that sterile ozone scent of high-end electronics. I was still curled up on the floor of the SUV. My muscles had seized up in the cold, and now, locked in this fetal position, uncurling felt like breaking dry twigs. I groaned, a low, guttural sound that scratched my parched throat. I pushed myself up, my hand sinking into the thick carpet of the floor mat. Where was I? I blinked, trying to clear the grit from my eyes. I looked out the tinted window. I wasn't in an alley anymore. I was in a garage, but calling it a garage was an insult. It was a hangar. The floor was polished gray epoxy, gleaming under recessed lighting that cast no shadows. To my left, a sleek silver Aston Martin. To my right, a vintage Mustang that looked like it had rolled off the assembly line yesterday. In the distance, a workbench that looked more like a surgical prep station than a place to fix engines. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the lingering lethargy of sleep. I had passed out. The car had moved. I had been inadvertently kidnapped. I scrambled for the door handle, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I shoved the door open and practically fell out onto the concrete floor, my legs tangled in the heavy fabric of my coat. I scrambled backward, crab-walking away from the vehicle, my breath coming in short, terrified gasps. I wouldn't run if I were you. The perimeter sensors are set to silent alarm. You make it 5 feet past the lifts, and the automated shutters seal the room. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the hard surfaces of the massive room. It was deep, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a man who didn't need to shout to be obeyed. I froze, scanning the room. He stepped out from behind a concrete pillar near the elevator bank. Nicholas Versiani. I stopped breathing. I didn't need to ask who he was. I had a file on him 3 inches thick back in my burned-out apartment. 32 years old, head of the Versiani crime family. Ivy League educated, ruthless, and famously elusive. The tabloids called him the Prince of New York. But the police reports I'd read called him a ghost. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that fit his broad shoulders with architectural precision, the vest buttoned tight over a white dress shirt. No tie. The top button was undone, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin. He was tall, easily over 6'2", moving with a predatory grace that made the vast space of the garage feel suddenly claustrophobic. But it was his face that held me. He didn't have the scars or the broken nose of a street brawler. He was terrifyingly handsome, with sharp cheekbones and a jawline that could cut glass. His hair was dark, swept back with disciplined order. And his eyes, dark brown, almost black, were fixed on me with the intensity of a laser sight. And in his right hand, held loosely by his side but ready to snap up in a millisecond, was a matte black Sig Sauer P226. I didn't mean to... My voice cracked, a pathetic, raspy whisper. He raised the gun. He didn't aim it at my head, but at my center mass. A professional. Stand up. I scrambled to my feet, swaying slightly. My boots were still damp, leaving ugly wet prints on his pristine floor. I felt small, dirty, and incredibly vulnerable in my oversized, grime-streaked coat. Hands where I can see them, he commanded. He walked closer, stopping 10 feet away, close enough to not miss, far enough that I couldn't lunge. You have 10 seconds to tell me who sent you. If you lie, I shoot you in the kneecap. If you stay silent, I shoot you in the other one. Start. No one, I said, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. I broke in for warmth. I didn't know the car would move. Lie, he said simply. The barrel of the gun dipped slightly. You used a shim to bypass the lock on a reinforced armored vehicle in under 20 seconds. You hid in the blind spot of the rearview mirror. You're a professional. I'm a journalist, I blurted out. One of his perfectly arched eyebrows ticked upward, a microscopic crack in his armor. A journalist. That's a new cover. Usually it's confused tourist or drunken mistake. Journalist is creative. My name is Chloe Evans, I said, rushing the words out. I worked for the Tribune until 3 weeks ago. I cover organized crime. I know who you are, Mr. Versiani. He didn't blink. Knowing who I am isn't an insurance policy, Miss Evans. It's a liability. You're trespassing in a secure facility of a man who has many enemies. You're wearing rags, yet you bypassed a $60,000 security system on my car door. You smell like the streets, but you speak like the boardroom. You're an anomaly, and I don't like anomalies. He took a step closer. The air between us crackled with tension. I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was deciding whether to interrogate me or just dispose of the problem. To him, I was a loose end. A potential assassin. Turn around, he ordered. What? Turn around. Slowly, hands on your head. I'm going to check you for weapons. I hesitated. Turning my back on an armed mafia don felt like suicide. If I wanted you dead, you'd be cooling on the floor already, he said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a dark authority that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Turn. I turned. I interlaced my fingers behind my head, my elbows trembling. I felt his presence behind me before he touched me. He radiated heat, a stark contrast to the cold that still lived in my bones. His hand patted down the sides of my coat. He was efficient, impersonal. He found the shim in my pocket and tossed it onto the floor. It clattered loudly in the silence. He checked my waist, his hand brushing against my ribs. He paused when he felt how thin I was. I was starving, my ribs prominent even through the layers of cheap wool. You're emaciated, he murmured, more to himself than me. Starvation tends to do that, I snapped, fear briefly giving way to my natural sarcasm. He spun me around, his hand gripping my upper arm. His grip was iron, inescapable, but not painful. He looked down at me, his eyes searching my face, cataloging every bruise, every smudge of dirt, the desperation etched into my features. You have no wire, he stated. No gun, no knife, just a piece of scrap metal and a death wish. He holstered his gun. The movement was so smooth it was almost a blur. You're telling the truth about the break-in. No assassin would be this weak. He turned away, walking toward a panel on the wall. I'll have my security team escort you out. They'll drop you at a shelter. If I see you again, I won't be this polite. I wouldn't do that if I were you, I said. He stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. His shoulders tensed. Excuse me? You're going to the summit tonight, I said. The winter summit at the Pierre Hotel. Nicholas turned slowly. The indifference was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. How do you know about that? I know the 5 families are meeting to discuss the port allocation, I continued, my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The gamble. And I know that the Albanian syndicate has bought someone in your inner circle. They aren't just planning to disrupt the meeting, Mr. Verciani. They're planning a massacre. He walked back to me, closing the distance until he was looming over me. The scent of him, sandalwood, gunpowder, and crisp, cold air, filled my senses. "Who?" he demanded. "I can't give you a name yet," I said, holding his gaze. It took every ounce of willpower I had not to look away from those abyss-like eyes. "But I have the proof. Encrypted proof. Where is it?" "Safe," I lied. It wasn't safe. It was in a locker that I hadn't paid for in a month, and the contents were likely to be tossed any day. But he didn't need to know that. "If you throw me out into that snow, or if your security team hands me over to the cops, that proof disappears. And tonight, you walk into a trap blind." He studied me. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound in the garage was the ventilation system humming overhead. He was dissecting me, looking for the lie, weighing the risk. I saw his gaze drift to my hands, which were blue-tinged and shaking, then to my eyes, which I forced to remain steady. "You're blackmailing me," he said softly. "In my own house, while looking like you're about to collapse from hypothermia." "I'm negotiating," I corrected him. "I was an investigative journalist, Nicholas. I uncovered the corruption in the sanitation department last year. I know how to find things people want hidden. The Albanians burned down my apartment. They got me fired. They put me on the street. I want them dead just as much as you do." He tilted his head slightly. "You want revenge. I want my life back. And right now, you are the only person powerful enough to survive what's coming." He stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair. He seemed to come to a decision. He pressed a button on his watch. "Marco." He spoke into a small microphone on his wrist. My blood froze. Marco, the name I had seen in the encrypted logs. The man I suspected. "Yes, boss?" The voice crackled through the device. "Cancel the security sweep of the garage. I'm handling a mechanical issue. Prepare the guest wing, the East Suite." "Guest wing? Are we expecting company?" "We have an asset that needs debriefing." "And Marco?" "Yeah? Make sure the perimeter is sealed tight. No one in or out." "Understood." Nicholas lowered his wrist and looked at me. "You have my attention, Miss Evans. But know this. You are not a guest. You are not a charity case. You are an asset. As long as you are useful, you are safe. The moment you stop being useful..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "I can walk," I said, trying to step forward as he gestured toward the elevator. My legs, however, disagreed. The adrenaline that had sustained me during the confrontation evaporated, leaving behind the crushing weight of exhaustion and malnutrition. My knees buckled. The concrete floor rushed up to meet me. I braced for the impact, but it never came. Strong arms caught me before I hit the ground. Nicholas had moved with supernatural speed. One arm hooked around my waist, the other under my knees, scooping me up as if I weighed nothing. "Put me down," I mumbled, though my head was spinning so fast the room was a blur. "I can walk. You can barely stand," he said flatly. He didn't sound concerned, just factual. He turned and carried me toward the elevator. I was pressed against his chest. I could feel the hardness of his muscles beneath the fine wool of his suit. I could hear the steady, slow beat of his heart. It was infuriating. I was a strong, independent woman who had stared down corrupt politicians, and now I was being carried like a child by the head of the mafia. But as the elevator doors slid open and he stepped inside, the warmth of his body seeping into my frozen frame, I couldn't fight the wave of relief that crashed over me. I wasn't in the snow. I wasn't alone. He looked down at me, his face unreadable. "You said you have proof." "I do," I whispered, fighting to keep my eyes open. "Good," he said. The elevator began to rise. "Because if you're lying, the snow will be the least of your problems." He shifted his grip slightly, pulling me closer to his chest to fit through the doors. For a split second, his chin brushed against my forehead. The contact sent a jolt through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'm keeping you now," he murmured, the words low and vibrating through his chest against my ear. "What?" I asked, unsure if I had heard him correctly through the haze of exhaustion. "Until I verify your intel," he said, his voice returning to its professional, cold tenor. "You belong to the family. No one touches you. No one speaks to you. You are mine to deal with." The elevator chimed. The doors opened to a hallway that looked more like a museum than a home. I had survived the blizzard. I had survived the break-in. But as Nicholas Versiani carried me into the heart of his fortress, I realized the real danger was just beginning. I had traded the indifference of nature for the focused attention of a predator, and God help me, I felt safer in his arms than I had felt in 3 years. "Don't get comfortable, Evans," he said, stepping into the corridor. "I never do," I replied, and let the darkness take me again. The elevator ascent was smooth, a seamless glide that defied gravity, but my stomach still lurched with every floor we passed. Being held against Nicholas Versiani's chest was a study in contrasts. The expensive wool of his suit scratched softly against my frozen cheek, while the heat radiating from him felt like a furnace against a block of ice. I tried to hold myself stiff, to maintain some shred of dignity, but my body betrayed me. I was melting into him, my shivering subsiding into occasional violent tremors that I couldn't control. He didn't speak. He didn't look down. He held me with an indifference that was more terrifying than aggression would have been. To him, I wasn't a woman. I was a package. Volatile cargo that he hadn't decided whether to store or incinerate. The doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded too loud in the silence. We weren't in a hallway anymore. We stepped directly into a space that screamed power. It was an office, but calling it that felt like a reduction. It was a command center encased in glass and steel, overlooking the white abyss of the storm-lashed city. The lighting was low, amber and warm, contrasting with the blue-gray violence swirling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Nicholas walked across the room, his footsteps muffled by thick, dark rugs. He didn't take me to a chair. He bypassed the massive mahogany desk and deposited me onto a leather sofa that probably cost more than my college education. He didn't feature gentleness in his repertoire. He dropped me, not hard enough to bruise, but with enough finality to show he was done carrying the burden. I sank into the leather, the sudden lack of his body heat making me gasp. "Stay," he commanded. He walked to a wet bar in the corner, poured a glass of amber liquid, and downed it in one swallow. Then he turned to me. The gun was gone, tucked away somewhere in that perfectly tailored suit. But the threat remained. "You mentioned a bomb," he said, his voice level. "Start talking." I struggled to sit up. My limbs felt heavy, disconnected, like they belonged to someone else. The pins and needles of returning circulation were starting to prick at my fingers and toes, a sharp, stinging pain that made me wince. "I need water," I croaked. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. Nicholas stared at me for a long beat. He was assessing if this was a stalling tactic. Apparently deciding it wasn't, he poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe and brought it over. He didn't hand it to me. He placed it on the low table in front of me, forcing me to reach for it. A test of motor function. My hands shook violently as I grasped the glass. Water sloshed over the rim, cold against my fingers. I managed to bring it to my lips, drinking greedily. The cool liquid hit my empty stomach like a stone, but it cleared the fog in my head just enough to think. "The bomb," he repeated. He leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. His biceps strained against the fabric of his white shirt. "You have 30 seconds before I call Marco back and have him take you to the basement. And trust me, the basement doesn't have heated floors. It's not a literal bomb," I said, putting the glass down with a clink. His eyes narrowed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You lied to me. I used a metaphor to keep you from shooting me in the head," I corrected him, my voice gaining a little traction. "But the effect will be the same. Explosive. Destructive. And you won't see it coming until the shrapnel is already tearing your empire apart." He moved. Fast. One moment he was leaning against the desk. The next he was towering over me, his hands planted on the back of the sofa, boxing me in. "I don't like riddles, Miss Evans. And I don't like liars. Give me one reason why I shouldn't throw you back out into the snow right now." "Because I know who the traitor is," I said, locking eyes with him. It took everything I had not to flinch. His eyes were dark voids, intelligent and merciless. And I know that tonight, at the Winter Summit, the Albanian syndicate isn't just planning to disrupt negotiations. They're planning a decapitation strike. They're going to kill the heads of the 5 families. All of them. Starting with you." Nicholas didn't recoil. He didn't gasp. He went perfectly still. It was the stillness of a predator recognizing a scent on the wind. He stood up slowly and walked around his desk. He tapped the surface of a sleek computer monitor, the screen flaring to life. "Chloe Evans?" He read aloud as he typed. "Investigative journalist for the Tribune, specialized in organized crime corruption. Last byline 3 weeks ago, fired for unethical conduct and fabrication of sources." He looked up at me, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Fabrication of sources. That's not a glowing recommendation for your credibility." "I didn't fabricate anything," I snapped, anger momentarily overriding my fear. "I found a ledger, a dual bookkeeping system that linked the sanitation department's sudden budget surplus to money laundering for the Albanians. My editor refused to run it, said I needed more proof. 2 days later, my apartment caught fire. The fire marshal called it faulty wiring. The next day, the Tribune fired me for a story I never even submitted. The Albanians have reach, Mr. Versiani. You know that better than anyone." Nicholas watched me, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the desk. He was weighing my words against his instincts. He knew how the game was played. He knew that unethical conduct was often corporate code for ask the wrong questions. "You said you have a drive," he said. "I do. Where is it? Is it on you?" "If it were on me, your security pat-down would have found it," I pointed out. "It's safe. Off-site." "Where?" I hesitated. This was my only leverage. The moment I told him, I became expendable. But if I didn't tell him, I was useless. I had to thread the needle. "It's in a locker," I said carefully. "Grand Central Station. I paid for 2 months in cash before my accounts were frozen." "Locker number?" "I'm not telling you that." Nicholas laughed. It wasn't a joyful sound. It was dry, sharp, and terrifying. "You think you're in a position to negotiate? You are a trespasser in my home, a homeless woman with a wild story and no resources. I could have my men strip search you, drug you, or beat the location out of you in 10 minutes. "You could," I agreed, forcing my spine to straighten against the leather. "But you won't. Enlighten me. Why won't I?" "Because you're not sloppy," I said. "Torture is messy. Drugs make memory unreliable. And if you kill me or break me, you risk the only lead you have on a threat that is hours away from executing you. You're a businessman, Nicholas. A brutal one maybe, but a pragmatic one. You don't destroy assets until you've extracted their value." He stared at me. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, a reminder of the death waiting for me if I failed this conversation. Finally, he sat down in his leather chair. He looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it was curiosity, like a scientist looking at a lab rat that had just solved a complex maze. "Pragmatic," he echoed. I like that word. He pressed the intercom button again. "Marco. Boss, bring food. Something hot. Soup, bread, protein, and bring a medical kit." "Medical kit? Is the girl hurt?" "She's freezing to death. Just bring it." He cut the connection and looked back at me. "The drive is in a locker at Grand Central. You have the key?" "It's a combination lock," I lied. It was actually a digital code I had memorized, but a key could be taken. A combination had to be given, and I'm the only one who knows it. "Of course you are." He leaned back, steepled his fingers. "So, here is the situation, Chloe. You claim to have evidence of a traitor in my inner circle. You claim the Albanians are planning a hit tonight. You want protection. I want immunity," I said. "I want a safe place to sleep. I want a hot shower. And when this is over, I want enough cash to leave the city and start over somewhere where the name Versiani doesn't mean anything." He tilted his head. "You want to run. I want to live. There's a difference." "Fair enough." He stood up and walked toward me again. "But trust is a currency I don't give away for free. Until I have that drive in my hand, and until I verify what's on it, you are in limbo." "Limbo is better than hell," I murmured, looking at my hands. They were still dirty, the nails broken, the skin red and raw. The doors to the office opened. A man walked in. "Marco." I stiffened, He was older than Nicholas, broader, with a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. He carried a silver tray with a steaming bowl and a plate of bread. "Put it there." Nicholas gestured to the table in front of me. Marco set the tray down. He looked at me with open disdain. To him, I was street trash staining the furniture. He didn't know I suspected him. He didn't know I had seen his name in the encrypted logs the accountant had left behind. Meeting with Monsieur Versiani, 22-1. I kept my face neutral. If I showed fear or recognition, he might realize I knew. And if the traitor realized I knew, he would kill me before Nicholas could verify anything. "Anything else, boss?" Marco asked, turning his back to me. "No. Get the car ready. We leave for the summit in 2 hours. The weather isn't letting up, so take the heavy armored unit." "The summit hasn't been cancelled?" Marco asked, a flicker of surprise in his tone. "The roads are a disaster. The commission doesn't care about snow, Marco. Unless you want the Russos to think we're weak, we show up." "Understood." Marco nodded and left, casting one last suspicious glance at me before the doors slid shut. As soon as he was gone, I reached for the spoon. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely hold it. "Slowly," Nicholas said. He was watching me again. "If you eat too fast after starving, you'll throw it up. And I don't want vomit on my rug." I glared at him, but he was right. I forced myself to take small sips of the soup. It was tomato basil, rich and creamy. It tasted like salvation. The warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the deep chill that had settled in my marrow. I ate the bread, tearing it into small pieces. Nicholas didn't move. He stood there, watching me eat, like a guard dog. Or a jailer. "Why didn't you just steal the car?" he asked suddenly. I paused, spoon halfway to my mouth. "What? You had the door open. The keys were in the ignition. It's a push to start. The fob was in the console. You could have driven away. Sold it to a chop shop for 50 grand. Why didn't you?" "I don't know how to drive an SUV that size in a blizzard," I said honestly. "And I didn't want to steal. I'm not a thief, Mr. Versiani. I'm a desperate woman. But I still have lines I won't cross unless I have to. You broke into my property. Trespassing is a misdemeanor. Grand theft auto is a felony. I try to keep my criminal record light." For the first time, a flicker of amusement crossed his face. It was gone instantly, but I saw it. "You have a strange moral compass, Chloe. It's the only thing I have left." I finished the soup. The energy was returning to my body, but with it came the exhaustion. My adrenaline was crashing. My eyelids felt heavy. "The drive," Nicholas said, bringing us back to business. "How do we get it?" "We don't," I said. "Not in this weather. The station will be on lockdown. And if the Albanians are watching me, which they are, they'll be watching the transit hubs. So we wait. We wait for the storm to break, or for you to give me a secure way to retrieve it." Nicholas walked to the window, looking out at the whiteout. "I don't have time to wait. The summit is tonight. If there is a hit planned, I need to know the details now. I told you the target. You. The heads of the families. That's vague. I need names. I need logistics. Who is the shooter? How are they getting past security? Who let them in? I can give you the how," I said. "But to prove the who, I need the drive. It has the bank transfers, the communication logs. It links your insider to the Albanian payroll." He turned back to me. "My insider. Yes, you're very confident that one of my men turned. Loyalty is expensive, Nicholas, and everyone has a price. The Albanians are offering a lot of money for your head." He walked over to me, stopping just inches from my knees. He reached out and tilted my chin up with his forefinger. His skin was warm, his touch electric. I stopped breathing. "If you are playing me," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "If this is a distraction, or a trap, there is no hole deep enough on this earth for you to hide in. I will find you, and I will make you wish the cold had taken you. I'm not playing you," I whispered back. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. "I'm betting my life on you. Don't make me regret it." He stared into my eyes for a long moment, searching for deceit. Then, abruptly, he let go of my chin and straightened up. There's a bathroom through that door. He pointed to a concealed panel in the wall. There are clean clothes in the cabinet. They belong to my sister. She leaves things here when she visits. They should fit you. Shower, change, burn those rags you're wearing. And then you sit here and you wait. You don't touch the computer. You don't touch the phone. You don't go near the windows. You're leaving me here alone? No, I'm leaving you here guarded. My men will be outside the door. But the summit? I'm going to the summit, he said, adjusting his cuffs. I can't show fear. If I don't go, the Albanians win without firing a shot. But I'll go prepared. Nicholas, I said, using his name without thinking. If the traitor is who I think it is, he'll be there, right next to you. He paused at the door. Then I suggest you pray I survive, Chloe. Because if I die tonight, the men who come to clean this office won't be as patient as I am. He punched a code into the keypad by the door. A heavy locking mechanism engaged with a distinct metallic clank. He looked back at me one last time. The expression on his face was possessive, dark, and utterly resolute. Until I verify this drive, you don't leave this room, he said. You broke into my car to survive? Fine. You got what you wanted. You have shelter, you have food, and you have me. He stepped out, the glass doors sliding shut and locking automatically. I'm keeping you now, he said through the glass, his voice muffled but clear. The heavy privacy shades descended over the glass walls, sealing me in. I was alone. I was warm. My stomach was full, and I was trapped in the penthouse of the most dangerous man in New York, waiting for a massacre to start. I stood up on shaky legs and walked toward the bathroom. I needed to wash the grime of the streets off my skin. I needed to think. I had bought myself time. But as the hot water hit my skin a few minutes later, stinging and wonderful, I realized I hadn't just bought time. I had sold myself to Nicholas Versiani. And looking at the expensive shampoo and the plush towels, I wasn't sure if I was a guest, a prisoner, or a prize he had decided to claim. But one thing was certain. The man didn't bluff. He was keeping me. And deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, the thought didn't terrify me as much as it should have. It felt like leverage. I turned off the water, wrapped myself in a towel, and looked at my reflection in the steamed-up mirror. The scared, freezing girl from the alley was gone. In her place was someone else. Someone who had just entered the lion's den and decided not to run, but to tame the beast. Game on, Nicholas, I whispered to the glass. I walked out into the office to wait for the storm, both the one outside and the one I had just unleashed, to break. I moved to the desk, ignoring his orders not to touch anything. I didn't turn on the computer. I just looked at the notepad he had been writing on before I woke up. It was a list of names, capos, lieutenants, and next to Marco's name, there was a small, almost invisible question mark. He knew, or he suspected. My heart skipped a beat. If he suspected Marco, why was he keeping him close? Strategy. Keep your friends close, and your enemies closer. Nicholas Versiani was smarter than I thought, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. I sat back down on the leather couch, pulling the heavy blanket he had left there around my shoulders. I wasn't going anywhere. For better or worse, I was part of the family now. The hot shower had been a deceptive luxury, washing away the grime of the streets, but replacing the physical cold with a deeper, internal chill. I had donned the clothes Nicholas Versiani had provided, a soft cashmere sweater, a deep, rich cranberry color, blessedly not navy blue, and a pair of black velvet trousers that, surprisingly, fit my thin frame. They were soft and warm, a deliberate cruelty. They reminded me of everything I had lost. I burned my old clothes in the antique fireplace of the East Suite's sitting room. Watching the filthy wool and torn denim catch fire was a symbolic act, reducing my last few weeks of misery into a wisp of smoke. Nicholas had been gone for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of pacing the plush rug, mapping the room, and fighting the urge to smash the privacy shields covering the massive windows just to see the storm again. I was trapped, not by bars, but by walls of marble, glass, and armed men waiting silently outside the only door. I finally settled down at the large dining table, clearing the surface of a stack of financial reports Nicholas had been reviewing. My attention was focused solely on the small, battered journalist's notebook I had retrieved from my coat pocket before burning it. This notebook contained the cryptic clues I needed. My journalistic instincts, dormant for weeks under the weight of fear and hunger, surged back to life. I was no hacker, that was true, but I was an investigative journalist. My job wasn't coding, it was deduction. Part 3, worry of my plan was clear. Break the password for the encrypted drive using only my wits, and confirm the betrayal before Nicholas walked into the ambush. The drive held the key, a set of secure communication logs and bank transfers. My source, the accountant who worked for the Albanian syndicate before they silenced him, had been extremely paranoid. He had told me, "They'll find the drive, Chloe, but they'll never guess the phrase. It's a memory. It's what I lost." I pulled out my notebook. On the last page, there was a series of random, seemingly unrelated jottings. SF, RN, 38K, October 12th, the last one. Loyalty is built on shared debt, not shared blood. Rosemary. I stared at the notes. SF and RN were abbreviations for locations and names I had already linked to the Albanian operation. SF was Santini's Flowers, the front where the money was laundered. RN was the name of the Albanian middleman. The key was, "It's a memory. It's what I lost." The accountant, I recalled, was always talking about his family. His wife, Rosemary, had died a year ago. I opened the elegant black laptop Nicholas had left on his desk, ignoring the silent alarm it surely had, and plugged in the drive I'd found in my coat lining. The encryption program launched immediately, demanding a passphrase. I tried common combinations: Rosemary's full name, her date of birth, their anniversary. All failed. I went back to the cryptic notes. October 12th, the last one. What happened on October 12th? The day the accountant last transferred money? The day he decided to turn against the Albanians? Then it hit me. The accountant had been a devout Catholic. October 12th was the anniversary of his wife's death. But what if the last one wasn't about the wife? What if it was about the money? The accountant had been forced to launder money for the Albanians to pay for Rosemary's protracted illness. The debt was shared. Loyalty is built on shared debt, not shared blood. The passphrase wasn't sentimental. It was practical, a monument to the financial ruin that had cost him his wife and his soul. I thought about the money. 38K, the final medical bill. The sum he had to pay before the Albanians released his debt, but too late to save her. I typed carefully, my fingers hovering over the keys. Rosemary 38. Key. Access granted. A rush of adrenaline washed over me, stronger than any hot cocoa. I had done it. My deduction, my memory of the case details, had won against a powerful encryption. The screen flooded with data, thousands of lines of code, transfer receipts, and, most importantly, secure server communication logs. I ignored the numbers, focusing on the names and dates. I quickly cross-referenced the Albanina communications with the Versiani internal log structures. And there it was, glaringly obvious. A series of encrypted messages detailing the location of the Winter Summit and the names of key Versiani personnel, all forwarded from an internal server to an unknown, untraceable Albanian address. The sender's IP was masked, but the account login wasn't. It belonged to the user, M.V.K., Marco Versiani, Nicholas's cousin and consigliere. The blood ran cold in my veins. The man who had been in this very room just 40 minutes ago, the man who had looked at me with such contempt, was the viper in Nicholas's nest. I hadn't just suspected him. I had the proof. The logs detailed the final plan. The assassins would be disguised as catering staff. They would use the confusion of the sudden blizzard, which had, thankfully, begun to abate, allowing the summit to proceed, to breach the security perimeter, knowing the usual routes would be slower due to the weather. The attack was scheduled for 8 p.m. I glanced at the antique clock on the mantelpiece. 7:30 p.m. 30 minutes. Nicholas had left. He was driving straight into the trap, escorted by the very man who was feeding the target information to the enemy. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I couldn't just sit here and wait. My utility was about to expire, and if Nicholas died, Marco would ensure I was eliminated as a liability, proving I was right. I wasn't just saving Nicholas. I was saving myself. I needed to get out of the office. I quickly copied the 3 most damning files: the final transfer receipt to an Albanian shell company, the user log of MVC, and the architectural blueprint of the summit ballroom with the attack zones marked, onto a small, easily concealable USB drive. I ejected the original drive and slammed the laptop shut. I ran to the concealed door leading to the bathroom, which led, I knew, to the back stairs. I tried the handle. Locked. I was sealed in. "Guard," I shouted, banging on the heavy wood. "I need to speak to Nicholas Verciani, now. It's urgent." Silence. Then, a voice through the speaker grill next to the door. Mr. Verciani left explicit instructions. "No interruptions, Miss Evans. He's in danger. You have to let me out. Marco is a traitor. The Albanian hit is set for 8 o'clock. More silence. Then a low chuckle. "You've been reading too many of those files, miss. Marco is the boss's right hand. Everything is under control. He would still log the disturbance. Protocol demanded every wild accusation be written down. But his tone made it clear he heard noise, not a real threat. They wouldn't believe me. The idea of the consigliere turning against the family was unthinkable to loyal soldiers. I had to get to a phone, a radio, anything. My eyes scanned the office. The windows were privacy shielded, but they were still windows. There was no direct phone line, only Nicholas's secure satellite connection device, which required a voice command I didn't know. My gaze landed on the desk. Nicholas had left behind his personal comms device, a small military-grade satellite radio unit. It was locked with a fingerprint scanner. I returned to the bathroom. I looked at the mirror, then at the used towel I had dried my hair with. An idea, desperate and insane, formed in my mind. I returned to the desk, grabbed the glass of water Nicholas had given me, and splashed a generous amount onto the silk fabric of the towel. I then took the towel and wiped the surface of the scanner, the exact spot where Nicholas's thumb would rest when activating it. It wasn't enough. The residual moisture wasn't enough to trick a biometric scanner. I needed a fresh sample. I remembered how intimately he had held me in the garage. His fingers had pressed against my arm, my chin. I had leaned against his chest. I searched the area where he had been standing, leaning against the desk. Nothing. Then I saw it. The coffee table where he had downed his drink. The rim of the crystal glass held a faint smudge of condensation, and a minuscule transfer of oils from his lips. I carefully used the wet corner of the towel to lift the invisible residue from the glass. I then pressed the damp, residue-laden patch of towel to the fingerprint scanner. The screen flashed. Green. Access granted. My breath hitched. I had 10 minutes until 8 p.m. I didn't know the command codes, but I knew the number I needed to call. The hotel where the summit was taking place. I rapidly dialed the first emergency number I could think of. The number for the hotel's front desk, which I had memorized during my initial investigation. The line rang once, twice. Finally, a flustered voice answered. "Pierre Hotel. How may I direct your call? We are experiencing heavy delays due to the blizzard." "This is not a drill. This is an emergency for the Verciani party," I barked, adopting the commanding clipped tone I used when chasing exclusive comments. "I am Verciani Intelligence. You need to get a message to Nicholas Verciani immediately. Tell him. The targets are compromised. The waiters are armed. Marco is the wire. Say that exact phrase. Now." "Ma'am, I don't..." "You have 30 seconds to save the lives of the most powerful men in this city. If you don't send that message, they will all die in a mass shooting. Now, before 8 p.m. I slammed the phone down. I had done what I could. The information was delivered. It was frantic, unverified by official channels, and likely to be dismissed as the rantings of a madwoman. But the specificity of the information, waiters are armed, Marco is the wire, might be just enough to make Nicholas pause. I backed away from the desk, hands clasped over my mouth. I had crossed a major line. I hadn't just used his resources. I had put myself directly in the line of fire for the man I knew was the enemy. Suddenly, the security lights in the corridor outside the office flashed red. The alarm system went off. Not a siren, but a deep, throbbing vibration through the floor. The guards had figured out how I accessed the comms. The door panel flashed red. A deep male voice boomed through the speaker, no longer amused. "Miss Evans, step away from the desk. We are coming in." I looked wildly around the room. I had the drive with the evidence. I couldn't let them take it. I ran to the wall safe hidden behind a painting. I didn't know the combination, but I shoved the USB drive deep into the pocket of the cranberry sweater. I then ripped out the hard drive from the laptop, just in case, and threw it into the fireplace, covering it quickly with a pile of charred paper from my old clothes. If they searched, they might find the USB, but they wouldn't find the main drive. The metallic clank of the lock mechanism on the door disengaging sounded like a death knell. I stood in the center of the office, bracing myself. I was no longer a negotiation asset. I was a hostile agent. The doors slid open. 2 huge men in black tactical gear burst in, weapons raised. "Hands up! On your knees now!" one of them shouted. I raised my hands, my green eyes fixed on the door, praying I had done enough to save the one man who had given me sanctuary, even if that sanctuary was only a cage. The weight of the tiny USB drive in my pocket felt heavier than any gun. I knew that Nicholas Versiani was walking into a war zone, and I was about to start one right here in his penthouse. The clock was ticking toward 8 p.m., and I was unarmed, facing his most loyal men, knowing their boss's most loyal man was the one who was about to betray him. I went down to my knees as commanded. My blood was singing. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a current of fierce, journalistic satisfaction. I had broken the story. Now I just had to survive the consequences. The tactical team was comprised of 2 men, both massive, both radiating the silent threat of highly trained operatives. I remained on my knees, hands raised, the cold steel of a Sig Sauer P320 aimed steadily at my chest. The leader, a man with the impassive face of a seasoned soldier, approached slowly. "Miss Evans," the leader said, his voice flat, professional. "You are coming with us. Mr. Versiani will deal with the unauthorized communication access when he returns." "And when he returns, he'll be dead," I countered, not moving. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to the frantic drumbeat of my pulse. I knew exactly what they were thinking. A delusional, half-starved woman tried to play hero. He's walking into an ambush set for 8 o'clock. It's 7:45 now. Every second you waste arresting me is a second off his life. Marco is with him. He is the consigliere. The arrangement is secure. Marco Versiani is the wire, I stated, using the exact blunt phrasing I had used on the comms. I looked directly into the guard's eyes. "I know it's impossible for you to believe, but I have the visual evidence. I saw the surveillance photographs of the hit team on the drive. They aren't just pictures. They're faces. I know exactly what they look like, and I know where they'll be positioned." I took a calculated risk, dropping my hands slightly and pointing to the breast pocket of the cranberry sweater. "The files are on a drive in this pocket, but even better, I have the faces memorized. They are disguised as catering staff. If you send me to the basement, Nicholas walks into a room where every waiter is an executioner, and he has no idea which smiling face is holding the gun." The guard hesitated. I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He didn't believe the part about Marco, but the detail about the catering staff and my ability to visually identify the targets was specific enough to give him pause. Nicholas had instructed them to treat me as an asset. My information had to be verified. "Boss gave explicit orders to contain you," the guard insisted. But his voice was less certain now. "Boss also gave me orders to wait, and I broke them to save his life. You know Nicholas Versiani. He values pragmatic solutions over strict obedience. You take me to the basement, and I'm silent. You take me to the hotel, and I might be able to save his life." I tilted my head. "It's a 5-minute drive. Take the risk." The guard exchanged a look with his partner. Loyalty to Nicholas was their highest code. If they disobeyed his containment order and he survived, they would be forgiven. If they followed the order and he died, They would be hunted down for failure. We don't have time for this, the second guard grunted, lowering his weapon slightly. We go to the hotel. She rides with me. If she moves, I shoot. The first guard, who I later learned was named Daniel, nodded grimly. Retrieve the drive. You are not going into the ballroom, Miss Evans. You will sit in the car and give us the descriptions over the radio. No. I refuted instantly. The photos were low resolution. They were visual checks, not detailed portraits. The light will be dim. I have to see them in person, under the ambient light. I'm the only one who can confirm the targets. I saw the reluctance, the deep, inherent distrust in their eyes. But the ticking clock was my most powerful advocate. Fine, Daniel conceded, his jaw tight. You sit in the observation balcony. You point, we move. No talking, no making a scene. If you try to run, we leave you to the Albanian cleanup crew. The agreement was struck. Daniel confiscated the small USB drive, checking its contents briefly on a secure tablet. He didn't have time to process the complicated financial logs, but the sight of the ballroom blueprints with X's marked on them was enough to validate my panic. The next few minutes were a blur of motion. I was hustled out of the East Suite, not as a captive, but as a critical piece of intelligence. We took the service elevator down to the sub-basement where the tactical vehicles were kept, a different fleet from the one in the main garage. The car we entered was a heavy, military-grade armored sedan, built to survive an IED. Not just a blizzard. The drive was terrifying. The blizzard had left the road slick with black ice, but the driver didn't slow down. He wove through the deserted streets of Manhattan like a missile, the sheer weight of the vehicle providing just enough traction. I clung to the safety strap, my mind racing. I went over the faces in my head, rehearsing the features. The small crescent-shaped scar on the neck of the first man, the unusual gold earring on the second, the distinctive deep-set eyes of the third. We arrived at the Pierre Hotel, just past 7:55 p.m. The entire building looked like a fortress under siege by snow. Despite the weather, there was a skeleton crew of security, Verziani's security, but their efforts were hampered by the extreme cold. We didn't use the main entrance. We went through the loading dock. Daniel's tactical team bypassed the hotel's internal security easily. These were men trained for infiltration, not just guard duty. They moved with silent, efficient precision, dressed in their own tailored tuxedos that concealed their earpieces and the tactical vests beneath. We are taking the service stairs to the mezzanine level. You stay there. You have a clear view of the entire ballroom, Daniel instructed, his voice low. Understood, I confirmed. I had done my part. Now, the execution was up to them. As we reached the corridor leading to the ballroom, Daniel stopped. He turned to me, his hand resting on the hilt of his concealed weapon. The red dress. The boss will see you. Don't react. You are not his date. You are an instrument. I looked down at the cranberry red velvet dress that wasn't even mine. It was a statement piece in this dark corridor. I know my role, Daniel. I'm a warning, not a prize. He nodded, a gesture of grudging respect. And we moved on. We reached the mezzanine balcony, just as the doors to the main ballroom were flung open. The contrast between the cold, sterile service corridor and the scene before me was jarring. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a spectacle of wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto 1,000 faces. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive champagne. Men in flawless tuxedos and women in glittering gowns circulated around round tables covered in pristine white linen. This was the winter summit, the gathering of the 5 families, masquerading as a high society event. My eyes snapped past the glittering crowd, ignoring the opulence. I scanned the room with the practiced detachment of a hunter. I was looking for the abnormal, the things that didn't belong. I found Nicholas Verziani almost immediately. He stood at the head table on the raised dais, a central figure in a cluster of older, powerful men. He was speaking with a man whose profile I knew instantly, Marco Verziani, his cousin and consigliere, standing right beside him. Marco looked relaxed, smiling, performing his role as the trusted second-in-command, the viper warming itself in the sun. My attention focused on the catering staff. They were the key, The kitchen doors swung open, and a stream of waiters emerged carrying trays of plated appetizers. They were all young men, dressed identically in crisp white shirts and black bow ties. "Target 1," I whispered into the tiny microphone Daniel handed me, my voice tight, near the south exit door, setting down a tray. He has a small, dark crescent-shaped scar on the left side of his neck, just below the collar. He's looking at Nicholas, not his tray. Daniel's hand immediately went to his earpiece. "Target 1 confirmed. Scarred male, south exit, hold position." I continued my scan. "Target 2, near the bar, talking to the bartender. He's wearing an unusual, chunky gold hoop earring in his left ear. It's unprofessional for a waiter. He's trying to hide it under his hair." He just made eye contact with Marco. "Target 2 confirmed. Bar position. Do not engage yet." My eyes swept to the main dais. The third target, the most dangerous one, was usually placed closest to the principal. He was supposed to be a familiar face. And then I saw him. Near the back of the dais, standing behind the head table, was a waiter with an air of cold confidence that didn't match the forced smile on his face. He was clearing plates, but his deep-set dark eyes were tracking Nicholas's movements with intense surgical precision. "Target 3. Immediately behind the head table, black hair, deep-set eyes, clearing plates. He is too calm. He's the primary shooter." My voice was barely a breath. "And Daniel. He's within arm's reach of Marco. Marco is the signal." "Understood. We are moving into position now. Miss Evans, stay put. I repeat, do not move." I watched in horror as Marco raised his champagne flute, a gesture that was, in context, innocent. It was the signal. The moment the glass was raised, the 3 assassins moved. The waiter behind the head table dropped his stack of plates, pulling a silenced handgun from beneath his coat. The man by the south exit ripped off his bow tie and pulled a weapon from his trousers. The man at the bar reached for a weapon concealed beneath the counter. The first shot was a muffled pft, aimed directly at the head of the oldest capo, who was sitting next to Nicholas. Chaos erupted. Nicholas reacted with inhuman speed. He didn't drop to the floor like the others. He shoved the 2 capos nearest him off the dais and simultaneously swept Marco to the ground, using him as a temporary shield. "Waiters are armed!" Nicholas roared, his voice cutting through the panic. But the fight had begun. Daniel's team moved into the ballroom, engaging the targets. I couldn't just watch. My adrenaline was spiking, fueling my need to act. Nicholas was in the middle of the melee, surrounded by targets. My gaze fell on a heavy bronze bust of some historical figure placed on a pedestal near the mezzanine railing. I made a split-second decision that defied Daniel's clear orders. I grabbed the heavy sculpture, struggling with its weight for a moment, and with a grunt, I pushed it over the railing. The bronze bust crashed down onto a large empty buffet table set in the center of the ballroom, landing with a deafening crack that fractured the marble top. The noise diverted the focus of the nearest assassin, who momentarily looked up at the mezzanine. More importantly, it created a massive visual distraction and a small barrier of shattered marble and bent silver. "Down! Cover!" Nicholas yelled, spotting me on the mezzanine immediately. He didn't look angry. He looked furious and focused. He grabbed the broken section of the marble table and pulled it toward himself and Marco, using it as improvised cover against the crossfire. "Service exit now!" Nicholas shouted to Daniel, who was covering the retreat. Nicholas dragged the stunned and screaming Marco across the floor, using him as a human shield against the remaining fire. The sound of gunfire echoed through the ballroom, punctuated by the shattering of crystal. I ran down the service stairs, heart in my throat, to meet them at the agreed-upon rendezvous point, the kitchen loading bay. I burst into the kitchen just as Nicholas staggered through the door, dragging Marco by the collar. Nicholas was breathing hard, his jacket torn. He released Marco, who scrambled on the floor, seemingly more terrified than hurt. Nicholas looked around, spotted me, and immediately walked toward me. His eyes were blazing. "You!" he growled, grabbing my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. It wasn't pain I felt, but the sheer force of his rage and relief. "I told you to stay on the mezzanine! I drew their fire! I created cover!" I gasped, pointing to the chaos still spilling from the ballroom doors. "You put yourself in danger. That was my primary extraction route. He was shaking with adrenaline. He scanned me quickly, checking for blood, his fierce eyes taking in the red dress. Just as Daniel and his team rushed into the kitchen, the door leading outside burst open. More Albanian reinforcements, alerted by the gunfire, had managed to break through the blizzard-hampered exterior security perimeter. "They're flanking us," Daniel shouted, firing over Nicholas's head to hold the doorway. Nicholas didn't let go of me. He pulled me close, tucking me tight against his back, his body a solid wall of muscle and anger. He didn't use Marco as a shield anymore. He was protecting me. He pulled a second, smaller gun from an inner pocket, a backup, and began returning fire with smooth, deliberate movements. The kitchen, with its stainless steel surfaces and sharp corners, became a kill zone. I was pressed so tightly against him that I could feel the vibrations of his gunshots through his ribs. I inhaled his scent, expensive cologne mixed with the sharp metallic tang of gunpowder. "Stay with me, Evans. You don't move," he commanded, his voice raw. "I won't!" I shouted back, focusing on the tactical situation, not the terror. Nicholas saw an opportunity. One of the catering delivery vans, a battered white thing, was parked by the loading bay. "Marco, get in the van, now!" Nicholas ordered his cousin, who was still huddled on the floor. Marco scrambled toward the van, still shaken by the close call. "We need the armored unit," Daniel shouted over the noise of the battle. "Too slow, too obvious. We use the van. Marco, drive," Nicholas shouted, emptying his clip into the kitchen door frame. Nicholas pulled me, still pressed against his back, toward the delivery van. He shoved me into the passenger seat, his hand cupping the back of my head protectively as he forced me down. He slid into the driver's seat and immediately started the engine. "Marco, where are you going? We need to go home," Nicholas yelled into his comms. Marco was frozen behind the wheel, staring wide-eyed at the chaos. He was useless. "Get out!" Nicholas roared, shoving Marco out of the driver's seat and into the back of the van. Marco tumbled onto the pile of crates. Nicholas slammed the van into reverse, tires spinning on the slick kitchen floor. The moment the van burst out of the loading dock and into the night, the focus of the remaining Albanian fire shifted from Daniel's team to us. The rear window shattered. Shards of glass rained down over Marco, who screamed in terror. Nicholas slammed the pedal to the floor, steering the battered delivery van through the narrow, snow-covered streets of Midtown. "Are you hit?" he demanded, glancing at me. "No," I replied, breathless. "Just glass." "Good." He looked ahead, his jaw clenched, his eyes hard and calculating. "We need to lose them before they corner us in the tunnels." He pushed the gas pedal, weaving the anonymous delivery van through the gridlock caused by the blizzard. The anonymity of the vehicle was our greatest defense, but the shattered window and the sight of Nicholas Versiani driving a white catering van would soon make us targets again. I leaned back, finally allowing myself to process the shock. My heart rate was dangerously high. My ears were ringing from the gunfire, and the smell of the gunpowder was thick in the cab. But I was alive, and I had been right. "It was Marco," I whispered, the confirmation finally leaving my lips. "You saw him give the signal." "I saw him." His voice was low, laced with cold fury. He knew. He set the ambush and then acted paralyzed, waiting for me to be killed. My cousin. My consigliere. He slammed the wheel in a frustrated, violent gesture that made the van fishtail on the ice. He caught the skid instantly, his reaction time unnervingly fast. "You saved my life, Chloe," he said, the words heavy and dangerous, meaning more than simple thanks. "You called the front desk. That was you. I used your satellite comms," I confessed. "I was locked in." "Brilliant," he muttered, a sound that was half curse, half compliment. "You risked everything. Why?" "I told you," I said, finally able to breathe normally. "I want my life back. And right now, you are my best path to getting it. We are partners in this, Nicholas. You have the power, I have the intelligence. And right now, we are both on the run." "Partners," he echoed, a dark amusement coloring his tone. "Fine. Then let's make a tactical decision. Partner, where do we go now?" "We can't go back to the mansion. Marco knows every safe room." They'll be waiting. I looked at the snow, the darkened storefronts, the anonymity of the passing streets. We need to go somewhere they won't look. Somewhere without surveillance. Somewhere remote. And we need to go now, before the blizzard breaks and they find the trail. I know a place, he confirmed, making a sudden, violent turn onto an exit ramp. Marco screamed from the back, clutching a box of pastries. Where are we going? I'm injured. I need a doctor. Nicholas glanced into the rearview mirror, his face a mask of stone. You're going to be fine, Marco. You're going to lead us right where we need to be. He looked at me one last time, his eyes burning with a dark, resolved intensity. You saved me from the trap, Chloe, he said. Now, we deal with the consequences together. You wanted a fortress? You got one. You wanted security? You'll have it. The van sped out of the city lights and onto the isolated, snow-choked highway. I glanced back at the terrified heap of Marco in the rear, then at the strong, capable profile of Nicholas Verziani. The chaos was over, but the reckoning had just begun, and I was exactly where I needed to be. I had not only proven my worth, but had bound myself to him in the desperate, shared violence of survival. The battered white delivery van, once a symbol of kitchen anonymity, was now a loud, skidding beacon of distress on the snow-choked highway, heading north out of the city. The chase cars from the Albanian faction had been lost in the dense traffic jams leading out of Manhattan, but Nicholas Verziani drove with the fierce conviction that they would not be fooled for long. The cab of the van was a study in chaos and adrenaline. The freezing wind screamed through the shattered rear window. Shards of glass still dusted the seats and floor. I was huddled against the passenger door, my hands gripping the dash, my eyes fixed on Nicholas's profile. His jaw was set hard, his dark eyes constantly scanning the mirrors and the road ahead. In the back, Marco Verziani, the treacherous consigliere, was a pathetic, whimpering heap. He had been thrown onto a crate of catering supplies, mostly linen and plastic containers, and was now cradling a collection of broken pastries, sobbing over the supposed pain in his arm. I need a hospital, Nikki. I think my arm is broken. Marco whined, his voice thick with fear, completely unconcerned with the life and death situation he had created. Nicholas didn't spare him a glance. You need a bullet, Marco, but that can wait. The contempt in Nicholas's voice was chilling. It wasn't just the cold anger of a boss betrayed. It was the deep, visceral hurt of a brother betrayed. Marco was blood, and that made the treachery absolute. We need to get off the main roads, I advised, leaning closer to Nicholas. My voice was hoarse from screaming during the shootout. The van is too visible. They'll ping it on traffic cams as soon as the gridlock clears. I know a place, Nicholas said, making a sharp turn onto a narrow, unpaved road that was barely visible under the accumulated snow. The van skidded violently, the tires losing traction in the deep powder, but Nicholas corrected it with practiced ease. It's a hunting cabin, built by my great-grandfather. It's not on any official record. No power lines, no cell service. Good, I responded, nodding. The isolation is our only defense. Marco knew every safe room in the city, but would he know a family relic like a hunting cabin? He hated the country, Nicholas stated, a cruel smile touching his lips. He thought it was beneath him, but he spent every Christmas there as a child. He knows it, and that's why we're going. I blinked. You're taking us to a place the traitor knows? It's a calculated risk, a partner, he explained, accelerating carefully up a winding hill. He knows the location, but he doesn't know the state of my mind. He thinks I'll hide in a mansion in Jersey. He'll never expect me to use the most exposed location I have. It buys us time. I didn't argue. His logic, cold and razor-sharp, was undeniably sound. My job was to assess intelligence. His was to assess threat levels and strategy. His strategy was to confront the threat, not avoid it. The drive lasted another agonizing hour, climbing higher into the desolate, snow-covered mountains outside the city limits. The roads became worse, forcing us to abandon the delivery van in a snowdrift off the main path. The last leg of the journey was on foot. Nicholas pulled a survival bag from under the van's seat, containing a small medical kit, a high-powered flashlight, and a few clips of ammunition. He shoved the flashlight into my hands. Move, he commanded. He grabbed Marco, who was still moaning theatrically, and hauled him out of the back of the van like a sack of garbage. "Nicky, I can't walk. The snow is too deep," Marco pleaded, sinking up to his knees in the drifts. Nicholas didn't reply with words. He simply backhanded his cousin across the mouth, a quick, sharp slap that snapped Marco's head back and silenced his whining instantly. "You caused this blizzard, Marco. You walk, or you stay here and freeze." Marco stumbled forward, terror now a greater motivator than pain. The cabin appeared suddenly, a squat, dark silhouette of rough-hewn logs against the relentless white landscape. It was nestled deep in a clearing, utterly alone. The air was frigid, still stinging my lungs, but the wind had died down, replaced by an ominous silence. Nicholas used a specific sequence on an old iron padlock to open the heavy front door. We tumbled inside, out of the snow. The interior was cold, dark, and utterly primitive compared to the Verciani mansion. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room. There was a rough wooden table, 2 iron beds covered in thick wool blankets, and the pervasive scent of pine and old wood smoke. "Get the fire going," Nicholas ordered me. "Use the kindling by the hearth." I immediately set to work, grateful for the physical task. My mind was still running through the events of the evening. The identification of the targets, the sound of the gunfire, the incredible force of Nicholas's body against mine as he shielded me. The adrenaline was now receding, leaving me tired and shaky, but fiercely focused. While I built the fire, Nicholas dragged Marco into a small side room, stripped him of his expensive tuxedo jacket, and tied him to a heavy wooden chair with thick rope. Marco tried to protest, babbling about his loyalty, but Nicholas ignored the pleas, his movements swift and brutal. "You're not a prisoner, Marco," Nicholas said, kicking the chair leg. "You're just waiting for your testimony. Don't move." I watched this exchange from the main room, stacking the logs. The fire caught quickly, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The smell of burning pine was comforting. Nicholas returned, his breathing heavy. He looked at his own shoulder, where the fabric of his jacket was torn and dark with blood. The adrenaline had masked the pain, but now the wound was demanding attention. "You're hit," I stated, walking toward him. "It's been hours. You need that cleaned and closed, or it will turn septic." Nicholas looked at the wound. It was a deep, grazing bullet wound near the collarbone, bleeding sluggishly. "I need my capos, not a nurse." "You have me," I countered, pulling the small medical kit from the survival bag he'd brought. I opened it on the wooden table. "I told you, I covered conflict zones. I know how to do this. Sit." He hesitated, then slowly complied, sitting on the bench by the fire. The action was one of vulnerability, a profound act of trust he would never grant one of his own men. He stripped off his shirt, revealing a torso that was a landscape of dense, powerful muscle. The wound, however, was ugly, ragged and deep. I took control, my journalistic pragmatism overriding any squeamishness. "This will hurt. I have to clean the site." I soaked a gauze pad in the last of the cabin's vodka, the only antiseptic available. I didn't ask for permission. I pressed the soaked pad directly onto the wound. Nicholas clenched his jaw, sucking in a sharp breath, but he didn't make a sound. His hand gripped the edge of the wooden bench so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Why are you doing this?" he finally ground out, his voice low and tight with controlled pain. It wasn't the cynical, "Why do you care?" from the city. It was a raw question asked in a moment of physical agony. "Because if you die, Marco kills me," I said, focusing on cleaning the wound meticulously. "And I don't want to die here in the cold next to a stove. I'm invested in your survival, Nicholas. We are partners in this, remember? Partners," he repeated, his eyes burning into mine. The heat of the fire, the alcohol on his skin, the shared tension, it all amplified the electricity between us. I continued cleaning, then applied antibiotic ointment. The final step was closing the wound. There were no sterile sutures. I found a tube of fast-drying, medical-grade adhesive, a kind of superglue, in the tiny kit. "I'm using this to close the wound," I informed him, holding up the tube. "It'll hold the skin together. It's better than leaving it open to the elements." "Do it," he commanded, I squeezed the adhesive carefully along the edges of the gash. It stung, and his body tensed, but he remained silent, watching my face. My focus was absolute, my green eyes fixed on the task. I wasn't just patching him up. I was solidifying our bond, making myself indispensable. Once the adhesive had dried, I applied a thick padded dressing and secured it with medical tape. "Stay warm," I ordered, stepping back. "Don't move that arm more than you have to. You're stable." He ran a careful hand over the dressing, testing the tension. "You're more than a journalist, Chloe Evans. You're a medic." "Where did you learn that?" "Covering conflicts," I replied, putting the kit away. "You learn quickly what's important. Clean water and trauma care. The rest is negotiable." He didn't put his shirt back on. He looked too powerful, too vital, sitting there with the firelight playing over the hard planes of his chest, his dark eyes fixed on me. The isolation had stripped away the facade of the powerful businessman. He was a warrior, temporarily wounded. "Marco said they tracked the car," he said, changing the subject, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "He knew this cabin. He must have used a tracker on the van itself, or he saw us turn off the main road. It doesn't matter how he knew," I said, sitting on the floor opposite him, feeling the warmth of the stones through the thin trousers. "The point is, the safe house isn't safe. And we only bought ourselves a few hours before he realizes you didn't kill him, and he finds a way to contact the Albanians. He doesn't have a phone," Nicholas pointed out. "But he has his mind," I countered. "He'll send signals. He'll find a way." The tension in the cabin was palpable. It wasn't the sharp, fearful tension of the city, but a heavy, charged atmosphere brought on by shared risk and intimacy. We were two animals in a den, waiting for the hunters to arrive. "Why didn't you leave New York when you had the chance?" Nicholas asked, his gaze intense. "When the Albanians burned your apartment, you should have run to the other side of the country. You had evidence. You could have gone to the FBI. The FBI is compromised," I replied instantly. That was the final story I was working on, linking the Albanina funds to the Bureau's pension fund. I had no money, no ID, and the people hunting me were global. Running sideways was pointless. I decided to run towards the biggest shield I could find. You. A slow smile, dangerous and acknowledging, stretched across his lips. "So you admit that your negotiation was always about protection. It was about survival," I corrected him. "You offered both. And I delivered what I promised. The truth about your traitor." I rose and walked over to the windows. They were small, leaded panes, still thick with frost. I rubbed a circle of condensation away, peering out into the silent, frozen darkness. "They'll be here by morning," I stated, stating the tactical truth. "We need a new plan. A way to contact your loyal capos without using any channels Marco might have compromised." Nicholas stood up, moving carefully to avoid stressing the wound. He walked toward me, stopping right behind my shoulder. The warmth of his body was immediately noticeable, a powerful, comforting presence in the icy room. "You're right," he murmured, "and I have a new plan, one that involves dealing with Marco now, not waiting for the morning." He reached out and gently took my hand, drawing me away from the window and back toward the fire. His touch, after the brutal events of the evening, was unexpected, a soft, deliberate caress. "But first," he said, his voice dropping to a low, seductive register, "we survived the night. We're partners, Chloe. We've proven we can survive a war zone. Now, let's see what we can build when the guns are silent." He looked at me with an intensity that transcended the simple physical attraction. It was the recognition of a shared trauma, of two competent minds finding refuge in each other. The fire crackled, warming the small, isolated space. Outside, the blizzard held the world captive. But inside the old cabin, the flames of a far more dangerous relationship were just beginning to catch. The cold was outside. The heat, the danger, and the shared survival were here, in the heart of the Versiani past. The most secure place, paradoxically, was the one that was about to be surrounded. The intense calm that had settled between Nicholas and me after I tended his wound was a dangerous illusion. It was the eye of the storm, not the end of the blizzard. The heat from the fireplace baked the cold out of the cabin walls, turning the small room into a cocoon of warmth, but the security was brittle. Marco Verciani, the traitor, was tied up in the next room, a constant, screaming reminder of the war that was coming to our door. We spent the time immediately following the medical triage in a tense, silent assessment of our surroundings. Nicholas, though weakened by the blood loss, moved with a warrior's economy. I, fueled by the soup and the successful application of my field medic training, felt sharp and focused. "They'll be here by morning," I stated, walking to the frost-covered window. I rubbed a patch of ice clear, peering out into the silent, star-dusted darkness. If Marco knew this place, he'll have a contingency plan. He probably had an emergency tracker waiting on the van, or he knows the geography well enough to guess our direction. Nicholas stood by the fireplace, methodically checking the ammunition in the survival bag. "He knows the geography," Nicholas confirmed, his voice low and hard. "This cabin was built by our great-grandfather for hunting retreats. Marco spent his childhood here just like I did. He will have already dispatched a team. And if they are Albanians, they aren't coming for negotiations," I said. "They are coming to finish the job." Nicholas looked up, his dark eyes meeting mine with fierce intensity. "Then we don't wait for them to knock." Our new plan solidified quickly, born of necessity and shared intellect. Since the cabin was compromised, we had to turn its isolation into a weapon. We had to prepare for a siege, not a simple escape. Part 6 of our survival became a desperate scramble to fortify our position before the first sign of dawn. Nicholas focused on the external security. He was intimately familiar with the grounds. He set up tripwires using thin fishing line from the emergency kit, stretching them across the 3 main paths leading to the clearing. He piled snow and brush near the main entrance to mask our recent tracks. He had only 2 spare clips of ammunition, so every shot had to count. I, in turn, focused on internal defense. The cabin, built in the early 1900s, was solid but lacked modern safety features. I scanned the room for anything that could serve as a distraction or defense, utilizing the knowledge I had gained covering urban conflict and survival courses. "We need a better exit plan than the front door," I told him, pointing to a small blocked-off window high on the north wall of the storage shed attached to the cabin. "If we can widen that, it gives us a high-ground escape route to the thick woods." Nicholas nodded, already grabbing an axe. "Good thinking, but that's only for the final minute." While he worked on the small window, I worked on preparing the internal defenses, the traps I had promised. I found a surprising number of flammable items under the sink. Cleaning supplies, old bottles of rubbing alcohol, which I had already used for his wound, paint thinner left over from a renovation years ago, and a leaky tank of camping propane meant for a small stove. My mind raced through the inventory. I took the cleaning supplies, ammonia and bleach, and mixed small amounts into several glass bottles, carefully capping them. I knew the mixture wouldn't create anything truly lethal, but the resulting gas, chloramine, would be noxious and blinding, a perfect tactical distraction. I placed these smoke bombs near the entrance and the main window, ready to be tossed. Next, I found the camping propane tank. It was too risky to turn it into an explosive, but the gas itself was flammable. I carefully rerouted the thin hose from the stove unit, running the tip near the main fireplace flue, ready to be uncapped and released should the invaders attempt to use the chimney or force their way through the front door. It was a crude deterrent, highly dangerous, but designed to buy us critical seconds. As I worked, Marco's muffled protest drifted from the next room. His whining was incessant, a constant background noise of self-pity. "You should kill him now," I stated, wiping my hands on a piece of rough burlap. "He's a liability, Nicholas. He knows your mind. He will find a way to signal them, even tied up." Nicholas paused his work on the window frame, the axe resting on his shoulder. "I need him, Chloe. When I bring him back, I need his testimony. I need my capos to see the look on his face when he tells them he betrayed the family. I need to erase any doubt about his guilt. He's my evidence." "Your revenge, then," I corrected him softly. "Justice," he countered, the word cold and absolute. "But you're right. I can't let him communicate." Nicholas walked over and stuffed a thick, greasy rag into Marco's mouth, silencing the traitor's screams completely. He checked the ropes again, cinching them tight until Marco's face was purple with rage and terror. He then placed a large, heavy crate directly in front of the locked door, blocking it from the outside. We regrouped by the fireplace, the warmth a central pillar against the encroaching danger. The clock on the small mantelpiece read 4:30 am. "They'll arrive at first light," Nicholas estimated, checking his watch against the rising moon. "They'll think we're sleeping, or too injured to fight back. They'll underestimate us," I said, loading the last of the ammunition clips. I was surprised by my own sense of calm. The fear was still there, but it was metabolized into pure, kinetic energy. I wasn't the helpless journalist anymore. I was a functioning piece of his defense system. Suddenly, a tripwire near the perimeter snapped. The sound was faint, a dry crack swallowed quickly by the vast silence of the woods, but it hit us like a gunshot. "They're here," Nicholas whispered, his hand going instantly to his main weapon. He looked at me, his eyes wide and serious in the firelight. "Get behind the stove. Be ready to throw those bottles the moment I give the word. You are the distraction. I'm the fire." I nodded, moving immediately to my designated position behind the heavy iron stove. The floorboards creaked under my feet. I could feel the cold radiating up from the wood. I lined up the 3 bottles of cleaning chemical mixture, ready. The siege began, not with a bang, but with a calculated, silent breach. We heard the muted crunch of boots on the thick, dry snow surrounding the cabin. They weren't kicking down the door. They were moving tactically, encircling the cabin, checking the windows. I peered through the edge of the curtain, straining to see. I couldn't spot them, but I could hear them. Faint whispers in Albanian, the metallic click of a weapon being readied. Nicholas moved like a phantom, shifting from the cover of the fireplace to the cover of the wooden table. He waited until the footsteps converged on the main entrance. "Now," he ordered, his voice barely audible. I tossed the first bottle through the broken corner of the main window. It shattered on the ground outside, and a thin, acrid plume of vapor immediately began to rise. I tossed the second one immediately after, closer to the main entrance. The Albanians, thinking it was a smoke bomb or tear gas, reacted instantly. Their synchronized movement broke. I heard shouts, coughs, and the sound of men scrambling backward, covering their faces. That was Nicholas's cue. He fired 2 precise shots through the thick wooden walls near the window, aiming for the area where the shouts originated. The bullets penetrated the logs, and I heard the satisfying thud of bodies hitting the snow outside. The response was immediate and overwhelming. They unleashed a volley of gunfire aimed at the windows and the front door, shattering the remaining glass, embedding slugs into the thick logs of the cabin. The noise was deafening, amplified by the close confines of the small clearing. "Back!" Nicholas roared, pulling me down behind the heavy stove. The air filled with the stench of gunpowder and splintered wood. The cabin was being systematically shredded. We were trapped. "The propane!" I shouted over the noise, pointing to the hose near the fireplace. "Ignite the gas! Too risky. The whole cabin goes. We die either way. Do it now. The north window." Nicholas understood the desperate logic. He grabbed a burning log from the fireplace. He had 2 seconds before they reloaded and breached the door. He aimed the burning log at the small hole he had cut for the escape window. "Run, Chloe," he commanded. He grabbed the propane hose, uncapped it, and directed the gas toward the open fireplace flue, just as he threw the burning log toward the escape window. The propane released quickly, creating a volatile, invisible cloud that filled the air. Nicholas threw the burning log toward the escape window, and the flame followed the trail of the concentrated gas in the flue, creating a massive whoomp that didn't explode the entire cabin, but sent a violent blast of heat and pressure up the chimney and out the main windows. The blast stunned the attackers outside, buying us our final chance. "The window, go!" Nicholas grabbed me, shoving me toward the small wooden escape route he had prepared. He covered me with his body as I scrambled through the newly widened hole. The wood scraped my skin, tearing the soft cashmere of the sweater, but I was outside. I landed in the soft, deep snow, my body sinking up to my waist. I quickly turned back. Nicholas was right behind me, but he paused, pulling the pin on a fragmentation grenade he had found in the survival kit. He tossed it back into the burning cabin, just as he dove out the window. The grenade exploded seconds later, turning the small cabin into an inferno. The heat of the blast pushed us both forward, sending us tumbling down the slight incline toward the cover of the thick pine forest. I hit the ground hard, my breath knocked out of me. Nicholas landed beside me, his good arm immediately gripping my shoulder, checking if I was hurt. The Albanians were screaming, confused by the double explosion and the sudden inferno that had engulfed the cabin. They hadn't expected us to use their fortress against them. "We have to move," Nicholas gasped, pulling me to my feet. He was bleeding slightly from the wound, the adrenaline of the escape straining the closure I had provided. "Marco," I exclaimed, suddenly remembering the traitor tied up inside. Nicholas didn't even look back. He made his choice. He's finished. The absolute finality in his voice confirmed the fate of his cousin. We ran, sinking deep into the virgin snow of the forest, using the massive dark pines as cover. The glow of the burning cabin behind us was the only light. Nicholas was struggling, the cold and the exertion making his wound throb. I took his weight, wrapping his good arm around my shoulder, dragging him forward. He was heavy, but my adrenaline gave me impossible strength. "Where are we going?" I panted, my lungs burning in the icy air. "Deeper," he struggled to say. "We run until we find a signal. We run until we are completely out of range of their search grid." We were moving further and further into the desolate, snow-covered mountain range. The warmth of the cabin, the tenuous security we had built, was gone. We were back where I started, cold, running, and utterly dependent on pure survival instinct. The blizzard, our enemy in Part 1, was now our silent accomplice, covering our tracks. I looked at Nicholas, his face streaked with soot and exhaustion, leaning heavily on me. The powerful Mafia boss who had carried me to safety was now relying entirely on my strength to move forward. "I can do this," I whispered. Not to him, but to myself, focusing on the rhythm of my labored breathing. "We can do this." We ran until the burning glow of the cabin was reduced to a distant, flickering ember, swallowed by the vast, hostile wilderness. The threat was still very real, but we were alive, and together. The fire consumed the old hunting cabin swiftly, turning the Verziani relic into a beacon of orange light against the pre-dawn darkness. The fierce heat pushed us forward, covering our desperate retreat into the pine forest. Nicholas and I ran until the flames were just a flickering memory on the horizon, until the only sound was the rasping of our own breaths and the crunch of our boots on the untouched snow. I had Nicholas's good arm draped across my shoulders, taking the majority of his weight. His wound, patched crudely with adhesive, was protesting the exertion, but he didn't complain. His silence was not weakness. It was focus. My own lungs burned with the icy air, but the primal need to survive lent me a fierce, unnatural strength. The fear of freezing, which had driven me into his car in Part 1, was now channeled into pulling us both to safety. We ran for what felt like an eternity, crossing frozen streams and scrambling over snow-covered fallen logs, until we reached a high ridge where the trees thinned. We collapsed there, out of breath, hidden by a thicket of scrub pine. "We stopped," I gasped, tasting copper and pine in my mouth. "Too slow to run, too exposed to stay," Nicholas managed, his voice a low, ragged rasp. He slid down the trunk of a tree, his head resting against the rough bark. He closed his eyes for a moment, marshalling his strength. "We need to contact Marco's successor, the loyal ones." This was the core of Billionaire. Part 7. The turning point where the immediate physical threat was replaced by the strategic threat, and the alliance had to be formalized. My hand immediately went to the pocket where I'd concealed the small USB drive. "We need to use a channel they won't expect. Marco knew your security protocols. Any encrypted line or satellite phone you left behind in the city is already compromised, or will be watched by the Albanians." "I agree," Nicholas said, opening his eyes. They were dark, intense, and utterly resolute. "We need an analog approach, a signal that only the loyal will recognize." We discussed the capos who remained loyal, Thomas DeLuca in Philadelphia and Joseph Santoro in Boston. Nicholas, with his precise knowledge of his organization, dismissed the younger capos as too prone to panic, and the older ones as too slow to react. DeLuca was the key, pragmatic, loyal, and ruthless enough to act without explicit authorization. DeLuca won't come just because I call, Nicholas explained, shaking his head. He needs proof. He needs to see Marco's betrayal with his own eyes. And he needs to know that the information came from a source I trust implicitly. Then we bring Marco to him, I stated. Nicholas looked at me. Marco is dead, Chloe. He was in the cabin when it exploded. The Albanians will assume that, I said, a cruel, pragmatic grin touching my lips. But we didn't see the body. The fire will have destroyed the evidence. We tell DeLuca that Marco is alive and that we have him. It's the only thing that will mobilize his fear and his loyalty. Nicholas studied me, impressed by the quick tactical thinking. You're thinking like a strategist, not a journalist. I'm thinking like someone who doesn't want to get caught, I corrected him. We need to find a way to the nearest town. I can use a payphone or a public internet cafe to send a coded message. No traceable comms. We waited for the first faint streaks of purple and gray to appear on the eastern horizon. The blizzard was over, leaving behind a world encased in thick, blinding snow. The cold was still punishing, but the immediate threat of a pursuing team was gone, their efforts hampered by the same white silence that protected us. We continued our exhausting trek for another hour until we hit a seldom-used logging trail. The trail led, thankfully, downhill. It was on this trail that we saw the first sign of civilization, a dilapidated, abandoned pickup truck half buried in a snowdrift. Nicholas used a large rock to smash the lock on the passenger door. Inside, tucked away beneath the seat, was an old battery-powered CB radio, its antenna snapped off, but the unit itself salvageable. Working quickly, Nicholas used a spare wire from the radio to create a crude, impromptu antenna, rigging the device to the truck's battery. The power flickered to life. I can't talk long, Nicholas said, turning the dial. The Albanians might be monitoring these frequencies for chatter. I need a single word, a code that only DeLuca will understand. He finally found a static-laced frequency. He keyed the mic, his voice raspy but commanding. This is Verziani. The Eagle has landed. I have the package. Rendezvous point Echo, immediately. The Hawk is dead. Repeat, the Hawk is dead. He spoke only those words. The Eagle was Nicholas himself. The Hawk was the family's code word for the Consigliere's authority, the traitor's position. He gave a coded geographical coordinate, Echo, that only Thomas DeLuca would know from decades of contingency planning. He didn't mention Marco's name. He slammed the CB radio down, pulling the wires loose and smashing the unit. That's done. Now we wait. We waited for 3 tense hours, hidden in the brush, watching the logging trail. The sun finally broke through the clouds, bathing the frozen landscape in blinding white light. Nicholas was growing restless, his wound occasionally seeping blood onto his exposed chest. Finally, we heard it, the low, powerful rumble of heavy machinery approaching the trail. Not one vehicle, but 3. Nicholas grabbed his weapon, pulling me down low into the snow. This is it, Chloe. If it's not DeLuca, they'll kill us both. The convoy stopped. 3 black, heavily armored SUVs, identical to Nicholas's, emerged from the tree line. The doors opened simultaneously. It was Thomas DeLuca, tall, imposing, and his face a mask of shock and fierce relief. He was surrounded by his own loyal men. "Nicholas!" DeLuca shouted, rushing toward us, ignoring the snow. Nicholas rose slowly, leaning heavily on the tree trunk. The sight he presented, bloody, exhausted, leaning on a homeless woman in a cranberry sweater, was a shocking contrast to the impeccable boss DeLuca expected. "Thomas?" Nicholas acknowledged, his voice strained. "The Hawk is dead, but I have the package." DeLuca's eyes immediately went to me, then back to Nicholas. "Who is she?" "This is Chloe," Nicholas said, stepping slightly in front of me, a protective gesture that was as instinctive as it was fierce. "She found the snake. She saved the summit. She is Verziani intelligence now." DeLuca's confusion was evident, but his loyalty was absolute. "We're compromised here. The Albanians are mobilizing. We need to go back to Boston. Santoro is waiting." "Before we go," Nicholas said, pushing past me, walking toward the logging trail. "I need proof." The moment was taut with drama. Nicholas walked to a spot on the trail and used his boot to kick snow away from a large, flat rock. Beneath the rock, he had placed the small USB drive I had given Daniel in Part 4, which Daniel had returned to Nicholas upon meeting him at the summit. "This drive has everything," Nicholas said, handing the drive to DeLuca. "The transfers, the communication logs. It links Marco's account directly to the Albanian network. He sold us the moment I was elected Don." DeLuca took the drive. The weight of the tiny object seemed immense. He looked from the drive to the massive plume of smoke still rising in the distance where the cabin had burned, then back to the exhaustion and blood on Nicholas's face. "My God, Nicholas," DeLuca muttered, shaking his head. "He was family. He was a traitor," Nicholas stated, the wound in his shoulder forgotten. "Now, we bring the matter to the capos. I want a meeting, tonight. The Albanians think I'm dead, and they think Marco is their informant. We use this lull in the war." DeLuca nodded, his face hardening with cold resolve. He looked at me again, this time with a glint of respect. "She risks everything for the truth. Nicholas, you found yourself a warrior. She belongs to me," Nicholas stated, the possessiveness returning, stark and non-negotiable, despite the circumstances. He walked back to me, taking my hand and pulling me toward the lead SUV. I didn't flinch from the possessiveness. I accepted it. In this world of chaos, his control meant my security. I had found the largest, fiercest predator in the jungle, and I had proven my worth not by submission, but by skill. I had earned my protection. I climbed into the back of the armored SUV, the heavy door closing with a solid, reassuring thud. Nicholas climbed in beside me. DeLuca took the front passenger seat. The convoy began its long, careful descent toward the main highway, leaving the desolate logging trail behind. I leaned back against the plush leather, exhausted, but supremely alive. The war wasn't over, but the battle for control of the Versiani family had just been won on a freezing, snow-covered ridge, thanks to a woman who had broken into a car for warmth and a journalist's memory. The Albanians were now scrambling, unsure if their traitor was alive, and unaware that the man they thought was dead was preparing his final counterattack. I looked at Nicholas. He was staring out the window, his hand resting on his thigh, the knuckles white. He turned to me and gave the faintest, briefest nod of acknowledgement. We were safe. The next phase, the inevitable reckoning, could now begin. The air in the penthouse office was thick with the scent of ozone and freshly printed paper, a distinct contrast to the cold, pine smoke-laced air of the cabin 3 months prior. The blizzard had long since melted, leaving New York City bright and bustling with the aggressive energy of a late spring. I sat at a custom-built, crescent-shaped console in the East Suite office, now formally designated the Versiani Strategic Intelligence and Media Command Center, my domain. I was no longer Chloe Evans, the homeless, desperate journalist. I was Chloe Evans, Director of Strategic Intelligence for the Versiani Corporation. My life had transformed from a constant struggle for survival into a meticulous exercise in managing power. My days were no longer spent chasing deadlines or avoiding eviction, but coordinating international data streams, monitoring rival organizations, the Russians, the Sinaloa cartel, and, most importantly, insulating Nicholas's legitimate businesses from any unwanted government scrutiny. The past 3 months had been a relentless, strategic blur. Nicholas, having used the evidence from the USB drive to expose Marco's betrayal, had convened an emergency meeting with his loyal capos and the heads of the other families. The sight of a bloodied, furious Nicholas Versiani presenting irrefutable proof of the Albanian-led assassination attempt, all validated by a civilian witness, me, had galvanized the commission. Marco had been dealt with swiftly and brutally, his fate sealed by the fire in the cabin and the unanimous vote of the organization. The threat had receded, but the cost had been immense. Nicholas had spent weeks restructuring, eliminating the cells Marco had compromised, and establishing me as his new consigliere of information. I wore an impeccably tailored light gray silk suit today, functional and professional, a world away from the cranberry sweater. I finished reviewing the latest report from the Chicago operation, a complex land deal that Thomas DeLuca was managing, and placed the tablet down with a decisive click. My eyes, once perpetually shadowed by exhaustion, were clear and sharp, focused by my new purpose. I had not become a trophy wife. I had become an architect of his empire's defense. The door to the inner office opened, and Nicholas walked in. He was, as always, flawlessly dressed in a navy suit, his expression composed, but a subtle exhaustion lingered around his eyes. He had been in meetings since dawn, dealing with the political aftermath of the summit attack. "Problem?" I asked, rising to my feet, already moving toward the war map display. "No problem you haven't already anticipated," he replied, running a hand over the back of my neck. A brief, familiar gesture of possessiveness and intimacy. "DeLuca is requesting clarification on the zoning permits. It's on your desk." "It's already flagged," I confirmed, tapping the screen. "He needs to cite Ordinance 407. I wrote the memorandum this morning." He glanced at the screen, a faint, genuine smile touching the corner of his lips. The smile was rare, and when it appeared, it was always directed at my competence. "You run this side of the house better than I ran the whole thing, Chloe." "I am motivated," I replied simply. "Self-preservation is a powerful incentive." "Is it still only self-preservation?" he murmured, leaning closer. The air around him always held the scent of expensive fabric and control. I looked into his dark eyes, acknowledging the question. Our relationship, born of crisis and fire, was not typical. It was a partnership of equals, albeit one governed by his overarching power. The passion was undeniable, intense, and fueled by the adrenaline of shared survival. But underneath the desire was respect. He valued my mind, not my compliance. "It is survival of what we built," I conceded. "The Versiani Corporation is now my life's work. Protecting it protects me. That sounds like synergy." He laughed, a low, resonant sound. "Synergy, spoken like a true executive." He stepped back, gesturing to the door. "Cancel the afternoon analysis. You're done for the day." "I have 2 more reports." "I said you're done," he reiterated, his tone shifting from partner to Don, a subtle reminder of the final hierarchy. "I need you to come with me. Now." He didn't wait for an answer, turning toward the elevator. I quickly grabbed my coat and followed. Arguing with Nicholas Versiani when he used that tone was counterproductive. Acquiescence, when timed correctly, bought greater leverage later. We descended into the sub-basement where his primary fleet was kept. The air was cool, smelling of gasoline and polished metal. The sight of the immaculate garage no longer brought the terror it had 3 months ago. Now, it felt like the armored heart of my home. Nicholas stopped, not at his usual customized sedan, but in front of a previously empty parking bay. In the center of the bay sat the matte black SUV. The original one. My breath hitched. The car where I had broken in, where I had passed out from the cold, where the whole insane journey had begun. It looked different. The deep-tinted windows were new, the exterior polished to a mirror shine, the wheels gleaming. Every trace of the blizzard, the salt, and the fear was gone. "I had it completely stripped and rebuilt," Nicholas explained, walking slowly around the vehicle, his hand resting on the hood. "New armor, new engine, triple reinforced glass. It's the safest car in the fleet." He walked to the back door, the door I had shimmed to get inside. He opened it and gestured for me to look inside. The interior was magnificent. The leather was new, soft, buttery Italian hide. But on the floorboard of the back seat, the exact spot where I had curled up, frozen and terrified, the carpet was different. It was a patch of thick, expensive black sheepskin, placed there like a deliberate installation. "I found the shim you dropped," he said, pulling a small silver object from his pocket. It wasn't the broken piece of metal I had used, but a custom-made, perfectly engineered platinum tool, engraved with my initials, C.E. I had the original melted down. "You don't break in anymore, Chloe. You belong here." He turned to face me. The garage lights glinted off the dark surface of the vehicle. This was the moment, the final resolution. "I wanted to bring you back to where we started," he said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous register that commanded attention. 3 months ago, you climbed into my car out of desperation. You were starving, freezing, and running from a betrayal I was blind to. You brought fire into my cold, controlled life. You saved me from the trap, not with a gun, but with your mind, And your audacity. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket. My heart started to hammer, a frantic, anxious rhythm I hadn't felt since the night of the summit. He pulled out a small black velvet box. He didn't kneel. He stood tall, dominating the space, making it clear this was an offering between equals in power, not a romantic plea. He opened the box. Resting on the velvet was a ring. Not a massive, ostentatious diamond, but a single central emerald-cut diamond, flanked by 2 square-cut sapphires, set in a thick platinum band. It was elegant, powerful, and utterly unique. "This is not payment for services rendered," he stated, his eyes fixed on mine, searching for any sign of rejection or doubt. "I don't pay for competence. I partner with it. This is a merger, Chloe, a final contract. You are the brains, the strategy, the security. You are the fire that keeps this empire from freezing." He took the ring out of the box. "I need my capos to know that your voice is my voice. I need the Albanians to know that the girl who saved me is now the woman who controls my resources." He reached for my hand. His skin was warm, his grip firm. "I am offering you the fortress. Not a cage. I am offering you the power to rebuild your life. Not by running, but by reigning. You came to me in the blizzard for warmth. Now, I am asking you to be the warmth. Be my wife, Chloe. Be my shield. Be my queen." I looked at the ring. It wasn't jewelry. It was a title. It was the acknowledgement of the power I had fought for and earned through blood and wit. I looked at Nicholas. He offered a life of constant danger, but also a life of complete, absolute security and meaning. I didn't ask why me, or what about the danger. I had asked those questions 3 months ago. The answers were written in the logs I had decrypted and the lives we had saved. "You risked everything on a journalist who was sleeping on the floor of your car," I stated, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through my composure. "That was your biggest risk, Nicholas, and it paid off." I held out my hand, not in hesitation, but in acceptance. "I accept the terms of the merger, Nicholas. But know this, I am not just your partner. I am your strategic asset. If you ever try to sideline me, I will burn down the whole empire and start my own." A fierce, relieved grin finally broke across his face, a rare display of pure, unadulterated triumph. "I wouldn't have it any other way, Regina." He slipped the platinum band onto my finger. It fit perfectly, heavy and solid. A tangible weight of my new life. He pulled me against him, his arms closing around my waist, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that was not soft or romantic, but demanding, possessive, and exhilaratingly real. It was a kiss that sealed the contract, a promise of shared danger and shared victory. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine, his dark eyes looking down at me with an intensity that promised devotion and dominance in equal measure. "We go to Boston tonight," he murmured. "Thomas DeLuca has arranged a ceremony. The family needs to see us. They need to see their new queen." I looked around the garage, at the original SUV, the starting point of my impossible journey. From a freezing girl desperate for survival to the woman standing in the center of the Verziani Empire. "You brought me home," I acknowledged, wrapping my arms around his neck, finally allowing myself to sink into the absolute safety his body provided. "I found you," he corrected me, his voice a low, final assurance. "In the middle of a blizzard, on the floor of my car, I found the only thing in this world that could ever truly protect me." He scooped me up into his arms, just as he had done on the night he found me. But this time, the gesture was pure pride, not triage. He carried me toward a different, waiting armored car, ready to take me to our future. The snow had melted, but the fire we started was burning hotter than ever. The end.